So hi everyone, welcome to the latest stop in our 24 hours around the world. And this time we're in Nairobi for this session. And we wanted to come to Nairobi to talk about this issue because we want to talk about stereotyping and how the stories from countries in Africa often swing from the very kind of hopeless, tragic angles to maybe the Africa Rising narrative, which doesn't acknowledge the problems at all or the nuances within them. And this does happen in other regions, maybe such as the Middle East, but we thought Kenya would be a really vivid place to start this conversation from. And I'm joined with a really great group of people to explore the issues. We have Dickens OLEWE, who brings a wealth of experience both from international news organizations. He's at the Africa desk of BBC, but also reporting on the ground at the Daily Star newspaper in Nairobi, where he was there for over 5 years and led the establishment of their digital department. We also have Jan Garup, who's an award-winning photojournalist. He's won 8 World Press Photo Awards, amongst many others, and has a wealth of experience covering war and conflict stories in countries such as Rwanda, Somalia, Sudan, amongst many others. And then last, but definitely not least, he's managed to find a room in Kibera to be with us here today, is Godwin. And Godwin is from Nairobi also. He's a documentary photographer, and he is particularly focused on how to nuance reductive stereotypes that he sees in communities that he knows, and has just won the East African Photo Award from the Uganda Press Photo Awards. And we'll talk more about that later. And finally, me. I'm super excited to be part of this conversation. I'm the project lead for our international projects at the Constructive Institute. And this is of interest to me because the way that Africa is covered, particularly Kenya, is the reason that I got interested in constructive journalism in the first place. I spent over 10 years working for international news organizations and local media organizations from Africa and the Middle East, as well as growing up in Kenya. And I really saw a big problem with the way the continent is portrayed. So I'm really grateful to be with you all here and to dig into it a bit more and see what can be done about it. So great. If we could start by exploring what actually we believe the problem to be. And if I can turn to you, Dickens, from you kind of have 2 vantage points, one from being on the ground there in Nairobi and seeing how coverage rolls out there, and then 2, this more bird's eye view, looking at the African continent from Broadcasting House at the BBC. Could you just map out what you think is the problem, particularly with the way international news organizations can frame Africa?
Well, thanks, CYNARA. So I think what's happening here is I think you cannot divulge what has happened on the continent, kind of like the colonial experience, rather colonialism in Africa. And that's kind of like fed into, stereotyping of the continent. So the continent has basically been put into this, boxes of essentially talking about corruption, disease, conflict. And that has pretty much just, it's been a very stubborn stereotype. And, think of any, probably, to talk about any global news organization, if they go through their archives, they'll probably see just how stubborn especially those 3 key themes, corruption, disease, and conflict. And in fact, one of the things that I was just thinking about before we started was last year, the New York Times got into a bit of a trouble because of they advertised, they were looking for a bureau chief in Nairobi, and the advertisement for the job was, pretty much hinting at those stereotypes, talking about conflict and terrorism. And there was a line in the advertising, in the advert, talking about there will be chances to delight our readers with unexpected stories of hope and changing rhythms, and people are really upset about that. And I think the problem is that the global media, especially being that they're broadcasting for Western audiences, have felt that Africa is pretty much an easy story. There is no nuance, it's not complex. It's so easy to just fly somebody from whatever capital in a Western country, and they just go there, land, and just file a story. And the reason for that, again, those kind of like those three themes that I was talking about.
And yeah, I think you described that really well, the problems with the international coverage of Africa. What about the local coverage? I mean, have newspapers in Kenya nailed this? Are they telling these nuanced, multi-sided stories of Africa that look at the possibilities as well as the challenges?
Yeah. So I think you would think that they'll probably be doing a good job. And sometimes, I've worked in these newsrooms, and I know that what usually happens is that kind of like from the global point of view, you're talking about kind of like racism and all that. But when you come to local media, you're essentially now talking about class. So you find a situation where there is this kind of top-down view when the way the journalists report on communities, poorer communities, it's very, very condescending. And again, it also the same accusations that are labeled against global media also are the same that you probably criticize local media for. So they also lack that. And you find that it's a media ecosystem that very much caters for the middle class. And therefore you find that, again, it's the language sometimes can be very dismissive and condescending as well. So it's a big problem. And I think, like, for example, I was just talking about the New York Times. For them, credit to them, they apologized and admitted that there is a problem. So again, it's just a question of whether these news organizations, especially on the continent, are actually as well agonizing about these problems, because it is a big, big problem.
Sure, thanks. And so if we go to you, Jan, you've been covering not only Africa, but you have done some extensive coverage of Africa, looking at issues of war and conflict and big important stories. Could you kind of talk us through where you sit in this coverage, and maybe talk us through some of the images and the motivations that you had for taking them? And if we could maybe see a slide.
Well, I totally agree with Dickens. The thing is that I think that I visited all 52, 53 African countries over a period of 20 years. And to be quite honest, I love the continent. However, there has been quite a few extremely violent conflicts going on. And that has been the main reason for me to actually travel there. On the other hand, I do know that there is a lot of things that is going on, which has a completely another feel or political status to it. I mean, I covered the genocide in Rwanda. I did cover it while it happened, but on the other hand, I've also been traveling there for the last, the 25 years that has gone by afterwards, talking about how the country actually changed into something completely different with a very, very low level of corruption, how women are approaching into the parliament. There's more than 40% women in the parliament right now. How the economy actually has had a significant boom, but more importantly for me has been, for instance, actually the Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu forgiveness policy, which has been completely adopted into this country. And these stories are, for me, more important than the actual conflict. And that is what I'm trying to focus on whenever I travel in the continent. Having said all these things, what is really, really important for me is that it should not be I mean, there's something completely wrong with me as a Danish photographer traveling to Africa to try and document these stories, because I'm sure that Godwin and Dickens and a lot of local journalists and photographers have a much better view on this than I actually do.
So if we've got a slide up here, could you just talk a bit about this?
This is from the genocide in April '94 in Rwanda, which is, for me, one of the worst experiences that I ever had. I was actually in South Africa for the inauguration of Nelson Mandela at that time. And I had been sent there. I mean, I worked for a lot of international publications, and I've been sent to South Africa, not because of the fact that you had this, that you had Nelson Mandela being the first president in the country after apartheid, but because there was a lot of violence expected between the ANC and the Inkatha movement. That was the main reason for me to be there. And while I was in South Africa, the first reports came out from Rwanda that there was this very well organized genocide taking place. And that was why I went there to begin with. And that is maybe the most important issue here, is this in terms of stereotyping Africa, is that was why I was sent. I mean,
mm-hmm. So would you say a lot of it's about kind of what, I don't know whether it's economic incentives, but, photographers have to get out to Africa in the first place. And the reason that photographers such as you would be taken there would be specifically a Rwandan genocide. Whereas maybe if you pitched a different story, there would be less reason or less willingness to take you out to the continent.
Absolutely. And that is actually one of the key issues and the problems here, is that if I were to pitch a story for the international magazines and newspapers that I work for, being gender equality or how life is progressing, I would be less. Or I would feel that the interest from international publications would be much less interested.
And Godwin, if we go to you, you've also had your images bought by news wires, and then they've then been published with different organizations around the world. Could you talk a bit about how you see Kibera, where you're from, depicted generally, and then also how your specific images have been used by different photo agencies, and how that process that Jan's just been talking about has worked for you as a photographer on the ground in Kenya?
Thank you. I think first of all, I'm grateful to have an editor who understands how Kibera has been portrayed in the past, and together we have been trying to share images that changes that nuance. And I think for me and the editor, currently we are going to the right direction, because we both of us are trying to see a different narrative from what you have seen from the past, and I think that's good. And also amidst that, there are some photos that if a photo agency sends you out, they need you to have them. And for me, I'm always skeptical of how a single image will be viewed from a series. And most times I try my best to have, like, it's difficult though, but I try my best to have an image that will holistically portray the general situation. And I also tried, like, my current agreement with the AFP is that my photos can only be used for editorial, in that it captures, for me, that gives me an opportunity for all other photos to be used. And what you are seeing now is these are landscape landscape photos of Kibera. And for me, seeing these photos, I'm not happy. I want to put a face to a place I call home, try to go more into these people's spaces. Being a local photographer also means, like, you're an everyday photographer. You see things that not many people come into photography will see. And I think I've been lucky in my photography. I'm not trying to change anything because I see things on a daily basis. So I'll not come in and be with a specific image in mind. No, I love several. I'll be out in my community. I'll be sitting down in my community and photographing, and you'll see that me trying to change that narrative doesn't come with me changing. It's something that you'll see on my photos. I'm not trying to change anything. You'll just see how I view my community as someone who's coming from this community.
Sure.
Yes.
And if we could look on the next slide, there's some pictures that have been picked up by the news agency. So this one, it's been picked up by the Chicago Tribune all the way over there, and then the same image for Le Monde in Afrique.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a bit about that process? Like, are these just stories that you're seeing every day as you're explaining, or is this something that your editors are asking for? And
Yes.
and what are your thoughts on what images are picked up by different publications and newswires?
I think sometimes it's also good to show the plight that you are facing, and at the time while I was taking these photos, I think it was also important to show what's going on at the moment, and also at the same time, there are some nuances I can't change. I can't tell the editor. I'm not even in contact with the editor to take this photo and also put this one aside. It's difficult, but for me, like, it also scenarios depends. This is a scenario that should be shown to depict or to show a certain situation. Also, these other photographs should be shown to show another situation. And also at the same time, they picked one image. But if you look at the series, there are like other several images from like the wealthy communities that I was photographing, but they were not picked. So it's a nuance that I don't have control of. No.
Sure.
Yes.
And I think, the things that all three of you
Can I just?
Oh yeah, sure, go for it, Jan.
Yeah, I'm just in this specific case of the photography or the photograph, which I actually think is an important image, but that is from my point of view, this is precisely what a stereotype photography is all about. I mean, I have done hundreds of these images, and water shortage is a problem. So when Godwin makes the picture, it might be it's real. When I do it, it's a stereotype. So that's actually where we have the problem.
Could you explain a bit more?
No, I'm just saying we are talking about stereotypes and the way that we portray African countries or the problems which is indeed present. I'm just saying that pictures like this does not make, for me, there's not a big difference between whether it's Godwin or it's me that does them. It's a fact that it's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm sometimes lacking from local photographers is to show a wider perspective in terms of the communities and what is actually possible or what is happening behind the water shortage line or all these things. That is for me what is really, really interesting.
Sure. And I think we'll go on now to look at different approaches. And in fact, actually, Godwin does have some interesting work that we can explore. But I think to kind of wrap up this...
Men det jeg tænker på, set fra...
just to wrap up this conversation about what's the problem, and like what you're saying, Jan, stereotypes and what Godwin was saying about the problems that he faces when which images are chosen by the news agencies or publishers. I just wanted to show you all a video to show that it's not just the four of us sitting here talking about these issues. This is a guy called Hans Rosling. He's a Swedish physician and academic, and he was an expert on development data and like what the situation actually is on the ground with developing countries. And he was very frustrated with the way news outlets cover countries in Africa. And this is a video about him having a go at a Danish journalist. And I would just be interested for you all to take a look at it and tell me what you think. It's not in English, but there's English subtitles if you can read them.
Nigeria er fanget i en dyb terrorkrig mod Boko Haram.
Ja, en liten del av Nigeria, inte resten. Nigeria har en snabb ekonomisk tillväxt och fallande barnadödlighet. Om ni väljer att visa, om ni väljer att för mig att bara visa min sko, den är ju jätteful, det är ju bara en del av mig. Om du väljer att visa mitt ansikte så är det en annan. Ni visar ju en liten del och kallar det för världen. Den stora skillnaden, att flickorna går i skolan, att barnen vaccineras, att de flesta har elektricitet hemma, att människor är kapabla och är yrkesfolk runt omkring i världen. Det är viktigt att visa, men det händer så sakta så det kommer inte med nya.
Vad baserar du den viden på?
Jag använder vanlig statistik som är sammanställd av Världsbanken och FN, och det är inte kontroversiellt. Det här är ingenting som man kan diskutera. Jag har rätt och du har fel.
I love this.
Yeah, so I think it just reflects on a lot of the things that we've been talking about, which is not to say that there aren't some problems, but there are other sides to the stories in African countries.
Can I just say, when, Denmark is rarely in the news, generally speaking, or internationally speaking. But the last time we really had a run for it in Denmark was then when the Copenhagen Zoo, they had to kill a giraffe. They did it in a way from an educational point of view so that children in Denmark could learn about it. And people all over the world went ballistic about how how we were dealing with this issue, right? So that was the last time Denmark was in the international media, was because of something quite simple, which was also had an educational point of view. And so it's not just in the African continent this happens. I mean, we don't just go around killing animals in Denmark. So it's just to say that media in general are really, really simple. They go for the easy picks.
Easy picks. And and that's what Dickens was saying. It's like Africa's seen as an easier story. Let's not get too complicated about it.
I mean, one of the things that I think we've not talked about, which I think is equally influential, is aid organizations. The images that aid organizations use broadcast in many, across Western world on television are mostly of, African children especially, and they, paint this picture of, desperation and, severe poverty. And it's true that that's the case. But then now you have a situation where right now, as we are rightly talking about, how then can we, correct that image and pretty much, give a balanced picture of what's actually happening on the continent. But then now you're literally competing with an industry which literally, it's almost like that is their model of trying to raise funds. And these conversations are complicated because, like I say, that's the situation on the ground. But how then can you provide a more nuanced picture? I think one of the things that we definitely need to think about, and as I was looking at your image from Rwanda, I was thinking about consistency and standards, because would you, for example, be using that kind of image, and I'm sure you probably have others, of showing what is kind of like the lowest moment of a country, of a community, of a human being? If that was happening, for example, in Denmark, would you show that on television? I don't know what the answer is, but then the equally complicated answer is that as well, is that when the genocide was happening in Rwanda, some of the images of that brutality was actually what forced the world to kind of know that there's something really, really bad that is happening. But again, it's complicated. I'm just throwing kind of what I'm thinking about right now.
Can I answer that? Because I actually find that very, very true and very interesting. From my point of view, what happened in Rwanda was not so much about the actual conflict or the genocide that happened. It was equally about how the United Nations did nothing to prevent this, even though they were actually warned about it, and how countries like France and Belgium was deeply involved on the perpetrator's side. So from my point of view, this is also about showing what happens when we as a world or in the United Nations are not treating people equally.
Yeah, and I think yeah, what we've really framed here is these images of conflict and war and suffering, and I think what we've explored is that isn't all bad. They do need to be noted. They do happen. Godwin's taking pictures of corona. Children are queuing for water. Jan's taking pictures of a genocide. It is happening. But if that's the only thing we see, then we have a problem here, and it's not the reality, because the reality is much more complex. So I think what I'd really now like to go with you all is to think about, how do we show this other side whilst acknowledging that there is the suffering and there are instances of conflict? How can we show the other side too, so that we have a multi-dimensional view of stories from Africa and other developing organizations? And maybe I'll ask you, Dickens. I mean, you've seen limitations in both the local press and in the international press. Like, have you seen anything that you feel is showing a different path, or ways that you or other journalists could tell a better story of Africa?
I think, definitely. I mean, one of the things that I think has actually helped, kind of Africa, kind of like get together this groundswell frustration of how Africa is portrayed, in some sort of like an organized pushback is social media. And you have seen that whenever there is, all these global media organizations have published content that, it's considered probably racist or kind of lacks the context that tells the larger story. You've seen people actually go and directly criticize these organizations, and they have been forced to retreat and think of a better way of doing this. And I think the other way as well, and you've seen right now you're much more likely to see stories about kind of like tech in Africa, the tech industry in Africa. You're much likely to see what Africans are doing about to fight climate change. You are also likely to see business stories and the interconnectedness of the continent. Next year, the continent is launching its, the world's biggest free trade deal. And those are the kind of the stories that you sometimes don't see being broadcast by especially by the global media, but they are happening, and you're seeing embers of them. So there are people who, through social media, individually or a collective, they're doing that. But I think one of the most important things for me is diversity, making sure that especially for the global media, that you have, you are giving opportunities and are employing people who actually come from these places, and not just employing them so that you have, you are, outwardly looking like you're diverse, but also putting them in positions of power and influence, so that they are sitting at the table when you're having your discussing your agenda of the day. And I think you're slowly seeing how that can change. The New York Times, I started talking about the New York Times, now have a Kenyan who's now the bureau chief. And you can see as well, just from the stories that he's been filing since he got the job, that there is a complete story. And I'm not saying that is perfect, but you can see that when you have people from, you are, diversity represented, then you try, the story becomes much more easier, it becomes much more nuanced, and also fun as well. So you get a complete picture of what this story should be like, good or bad.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, Godwin, you're in your own way trying to nuance this stereotype. And, you were born in Kibera. It's a slum in Nairobi. It's one of the biggest in Africa. And you've been doing some work which you've called Everyday Kibera, and it's part of the Everyday Africa projects. It would be great if you could tell us a bit more about these two and what you're trying to do with them.
Yeah, so the first image is mine. And I think for me, during the pandemic, I was more interested in how we are going to respond to it. And so when the pandemic was starting out, I was also very interested in how other photographers from outside were going to view Kibera. And luckily, I don't know if I can say luckily or I can't find any other word to say it, but I can assure you that the images that we could have been seeing now would have been different from what if people were allowed to come in. That's my point of view. That's what I'm saying. But for me, I was really interested in how my community was going to navigate the tough situation that we were facing at this time. And so the photos for me, it's an extension of my personal work of trying to create fresh and new narrative in the kind of photography that I've been seeing, from the kind of photography that I've been seeing. So this work is more about a community finding strength amidst a pandemic. And also I wanted, actually most of the photos that I captured showed some kind of resiliency in that. Yes.
And the title of the series, it's called, is it Reinventing and Adapting Through Corona?
Through coronavirus. Yes.
Yeah, so that's what you wanted to focus on, this kind of the way people were coping rather than the suffering from it. Is that right?
Yes. Also, I was taking all kind of photos that were coming my way, and I tried to. When I was doing the selection, I was not going to be biased in any other way. At the end, I found out that the photos that I was taking were showing, or truly showing how this community was going through the coronavirus in a more balanced way. That's what I tried to do. Like, yes. So
yeah, and this is what you won the East African Photography Award for. And could you explain to us a bit more broadly what Everyday Kibera is and the Everyday Africa projects?
So the Everyday Africa project is all about the local photographers showing their daily activities in their homes, because what we have come to experience, or let me say, what we have come to, the kind of photos or the kind of visuals we have come to consume from Africa, they come from Africa, and then we see them on international media. And for me, creating the platform Everyday Kibera, or being a member of the African Photojournalism Database, is more about showing the everyday life. Like, it's not single images, or it's not what I can say, news stories, but the everyday existence of people who live in this place.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great
So,
work.
yeah, so Everyday Kibera is actually a group, is a platform of local photographers who contribute to it. So, and everyone has the password, everyone has the access to it. So they post what they see. No one judges their postings. And if you can see, there's like a big difference and there's a big change to what you always see coming from this place. And for us, like the other day we were joking when we Googled Kibera and we saw landscape tin roof shacks. And for us, we wanted to, actually we were joking if we can create our own Google of Kibera, just to like see, like just to direct people and tell them, oh, this is like, this is what's happening. But that's difficult because the publication are from like big media houses, that it's going to be a huge task changing the algorithm.
yeah, that's ambitious.
Yeah.
But yeah, so but I think it's really interesting how you are trying to show other views and other stories. And if I can go to you, Jan, so this is, Godwin's rooted in Kibera, and he's telling these stories about his community from there and for that. Do you think there is a role for foreign photojournalists to maybe look at different approaches, to maybe do something different to the flying out for the war or the bearing witness? And what is it that you think photojournalists and maybe you are doing and could do to do something different?
Well, I think there is a big problem in terms of parachute journalism. You fly in people, you dump them on the ground, they make a news story from somewhere, whether it's Africa or the Middle East, it doesn't really matter. But they are not consolidated in necessarily in the truth. It might show a brief news story. For me, in-depth reporting is the most interesting. And when you do in-depth reporting, you would often find a lot of interesting stories, which is also about survival or about life or love or forgiveness, many other stories. And for me, that is the most interesting part, actually. I would never be able to compete with Godwin in terms of showing his community. Whatever I would do would be superficial. It would be just scratching the surface, because he lives there. He knows what life is all about. And for me, that is much more interesting than it is to look at my own images from Kibera. I have been to Kibera as well, and I have not done pictures like Godwin has.
And you shared some photographs with us, if we can see the slide, about some work that you've done in Somalia, which you feel is maybe taking a different slant to, say, the bearing witness images in Rwanda. Could you tell us a bit about them?
Well, I mean, I've been working in Somalia for the last 11, 12 years, since Al-Shabaab had control of half of Mogadishu. And over these 10, 12 years, I've done a lot of stories which has nothing to do with the conflict. But in this case, it has to do with young women doing sports or playing basketball, which was actually a very, very interesting story because they were threatened on a daily basis by the Al-Shabaab militia, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, they were doing sports. They would be traditionally dressed over the day, and once they got into this old stadium, and the doors were closed, the clothes that they were normally wearing was taken off, and they were all in Ronaldo or Messi t-shirts, and they were just doing sports. And it was indeed a very, very positive story about gender equality and how women were actually progressing in terms of taking a stance and doing what was important to them. And for me, that was a really, really interesting and positive story to do from a place where where all the stories that you hear from Somalia are complete stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. And there's also, you showed an image of a guy with a shark on his head. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I mean, that's that's a daily picture. That's just a daily picture from Mogadishu. You could see that every day. But the story behind the pictures is actually much, much more interesting because of the piracy of the Somali coast. A lot of the international trawlers were kicked out of the Bay of Aden. And the marine life just exploded. And for some reason, or because of this, fishing became a huge industry in Somalia, which was not traditionally a big part of the country. And again, that was a really, really interesting story to do. So I do try to portray also progress and development in African countries. I'm not just interested in war or conflict. I really try to do my utmost to portray Africa with a lot of diversity, and how the continent is actually developing in many, many ways.
Sure. And I think, we've seen both from within and without Africa, that there's so much more potential to tell a nuanced story of the continent. And I think we're going to wrap up here, but this whole conference, the theme is journalism for tomorrow. And I just want to end with asking each of you what you would like to see, like one practical tip or request that you'd like to see for tomorrow's journalism for coverage of Africa, whether it be a print journalist or a photojournalist. So if we can start with you, Dickens, what would be your one thought?
For the next generation. I think what's happening now is pretty much what I think we're just going to see more of it, and that's we've just seen what Godwin does with Everyday Kibera, and that's fantastic. That there are journalists out there who are not waiting to be commissioned, but rather going out there and actually capturing that reality and sharing it with the world, unfiltered. And that's what I see more of I'll definitely encourage many journalists to, young journalists to definitely continue doing that. I think importantly, one thing that I think is really key is to amplify and show African agency. There are people on the continent who are working tirelessly. They're trying to, and they're doing a fantastic job of navigating through all these visible and invisible structures that are holding them back to, to make a life out for themselves, to influence politics, to influence communities. There are all these stories everywhere, and it's just a matter of paying attention and reaching out to these people and amplify these stories, so that what I am doing where I am, and what Godwin is doing, and what other people are doing as well, tells a much complete story. It's complex, and that is what the story of Africa should be.
Jan, any requests or suggestions for the next generation of photojournalists that might cover Africa?
Well, I agree with Dickens. Complexity is the key aspect here. I mean, life is not either black or white. There's a lot of tones in between, and it's always in the details that it becomes interesting. And Africa, I mean, we talk about Africa as a country. It's a continent. It's a big place. And there is a lot of positive things going on. And in the best of all worlds, I would be unemployed. I would never have to go there. There would be a lot of local photographers and journalists who would cover the continent with all its diversity and all its complexity in an in-depth way of reporting, so that I wouldn't have to go there, so I could actually stay home with my kids in Denmark and read about how life in Africa is progressing.
And Godwin, you have the final say. What would you want? What would be your request for the journalism of tomorrow for coverage of countries in Africa? What would you ask for?
Yeah. To add on what Dickens has said, also for me, I'd like to see more solution-focused journalism, where we don't just consume an image or consume a story and that's it. I need more, like, something to be done behind the stories, because it's very disheartening to photograph a situation over and over again in the same circumstances. So I think having the idea of solution-focused journalism is also very crucial to the journalism industry, if I can say.
And Dickens, did you have another question or point?
No, I just wanted to add to the point, and it's pretty much just related to what you just said there, Gordon, which is kind of, especially talking about the local media. I think one of the things that I think is an opportunity is for the local media to kind of raise the bar when it comes to the quality of national conversation. Literally, these problems that we're talking about. You showed a picture of young kids literally queuing to get water. How is that story being told? Is this just told as a moment that, hey, these kids in Kibera were queuing to get water? What's the structural problem that has resulted in that situation? And that's what I think where the journalism comes in, which, yes, cover the structural problems, but as well, are there other areas within the city, for example, where the water problem has been solved? What did they do? What parts did they put together to kind of address that problem? So I also think about, what is the role of the media in a democracy? Where do you actually place yourself so that, yes, you're doing accountable driven journalism, but you're also creating an environment where the country can have exactly what I was saying, raising the bar of national conversation.
Great. Thank you all so much. It's been great to talk to you. And yeah, thanks for taking your time.